but I do have a word that I feel like is relevant to today, so I'm going to dive in. A couple weeks ago, I was hanging my Christmas lights on my house, the outside of my house. It has never been an ambition of mine to be the next Clark Griswold. I just want to be the best house on the street. You know what I mean? And fortunately, my neighborhood doesn't go crazy. Everybody does a little something, but they don't really go bananas with the Christmas decorations. You know what I mean? They do some stuff, but they don't like go all out. So for the past 3 years, I have been the best house on the street. Then this year, a new family moved in from California. It's one of those stories that you read about, that the great migration from California because of what's happening with COVID and the restrictions and the government. They are a family that packed up, sold their house, moved, and bought a house in Texas because they like Texas more than California. And this guy, I guess they do it big in California with the Christmas lights because this guy's giving me a run for my money this year. I've got the same setup every year. This year I had to add some inflatables. I had to add some lights because I still want to be the best house on the street. So I'm hanging the lights on my house, and I'm trying to think out how I'm going to beat Jeff this year, and that's his name. And I'm brainstorming, and this white, older model Chevy Silverado kind of cruises slowly down the street with its lights off. I'm like, what's that about? It's like 9 o'clock at night. What's going on? Maybe later. Maybe it was closer to 10. It was late. And that's weird, but whatever. So I'm listening to a podcast in my headphones, and I'm just hanging my lights. A couple minutes later, I hear a bang, and the Chevy peels out. The same Chevy truck peels out in front of my neighbor's house. Rocks and dirt fly everywhere, and it goes barreling down the street with its lights off, back the direction it came. And I'm like, this point, I'm a little high alert. I mean, I'm not like one of our safety team members like Eric or Jason or Pastor Rob. I'm not super, they're not that they're paranoid. I don't live on high alert all the time. I mean, these guys are another level. They live on high alert all the time. They walk into a room, look for the exits. I'm not like that, but this truck had me a little worried. I'm like, do I need to go inside and grab my piece? And what's happening with this truck? And in that moment, my neighbor runs out of her house with her 2 high school age boys, and they were in Christmas pajamas. It looked like they had just been watching a Christmas movie together. And she's a single mom. She's got these 2 high school age boys, another daughter who's off at college, and they come out of the house, and she's short. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is about y'all short ladies. Y'all fight. What it is about y'all short ladies? I mean, something about what happened? She comes out and she is fiery. She goes, hey, and I'm hanging my lights, and I'm like, yes? I'm not even on a ladder. She's just that short. Yes? And she goes, have you been out here for a while? I said, yeah, I have. And she goes, did you see something just now? And I go, yeah, there was like this car like sped out. And she goes, oh, okay. And the 2 high school boys are with her. And he goes, was it like an older model white Chevy pickup? And I said, yeah, it was. And he goes, oh, I know exactly what happened. This high school kid. Apparently they had been inside watching a Christmas movie together. A high school friend of theirs came up, wailed on their front door, just pounding, scared the snot out of everybody in the house. Then the high schoolers ran in the truck, sped off. And the mom goes, who was it? It was someone from school. Was it Ashton? If it's Ashton, call him right now. Tell him I'm about to kick his butt. Okay, all right. Their perfectly calm, nice, quiet Christmas movie night had been drastically interrupted, and they were terrified. They came out of the house like I thought this lady was about to explode. I'm like, what do you do? Are you okay? Like, what can we do right now? She came out of the house just absolutely wound up. Yeah, I've been here. We checked my doorbell camera. It didn't catch the truck, so I told her I was just a friend playing a stupid prank, so it de-escalated. But I get a sense right now that many of us, that is happening to us in the spiritual, that we're just trying to go about our lives, living quiet lives, and the enemy is having a field day with our emotions. You're having a nice, quiet life. You're trying to just do the right thing, raise your kids, just talk to your family, work your job, and the enemy is coming up and just wailing on the door of your heart with different things, with trauma, with sickness, with family drama, with disease, with financial burdens, and he is having a field day with you, and he's wearing you out. You are high-strung and wound up. I mean, I preach it to myself because I feel the attack too. I'm not like, I've walked through this and I'm the champion of the world and let me teach you how. I'm going, no, I feel this too, that there's this global sense that the enemy is running up to our door and just pounding on it and scaring the snot out of all of us. I don't know if anybody relates to that. Maybe that's just me and I'm just preaching to myself. If you're online and that's you, let me know that's you so I can take comfort in that he is having a field day and I'm tired of it. I came here today to do two things, to drink hot chocolate and to kick the devil's tail, and I'm all out of hot chocolate. I've had it with the enemy having a field day on our joy. I was reading Nehemiah. You're going, this is a Christmas message. How's he getting Nehemiah out of this? Just bear with me. It'll connect. I was reading Nehemiah, and it's this story. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but it's this story where the walls of the city actually, let me back up. I'm going to get to Nehemiah. Before I do, I want to highlight a reason why I'm going to talk about this. Because it's not just us in this church that are feeling the attack of the enemy. It's not just us here, that it's global. And actually, I'm going to title this message, the official title is In His Presence is Fullness of Joy. But if I had to pick an alternate title, I would call it State of Emergency. Because just a couple of weeks ago, a declaration from the American Academy of Pediatrics, American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and the Children's Hospital Association declared a state of emergency in the mental health of our children. That in our nation, they've realized, okay, we thought the pandemic was COVID-19, and in a lot of ways it was. But what we're also realizing is there's pandemic part 2, the mental health crisis. That people are isolated, people are afraid, people are under attack. And the pandemic, it was happening long before the pandemic. That the joy of our children was under attack. That the mental health of our children was under attack. There's particularly in ages like 10 to 24, they've noticed an increase, even since 2018. The pandemic has intensified it, but they've actually declared, as of like 2 weeks ago, state of emergency. This is a crisis. Mental health. State of emergency in children's mental health. They're calling on policymakers. They're trying to find resolutions. They're trying to find things to do. They're trying to find ways to combat this mental health crisis. I think we have some answers to combat that mental health crisis that we're going to share today that our world maybe needs to know about. But I'm letting you know you're not alone in this battle, that joy is being robbed from us. Joy is being stolen from us. It's not somebody in a white Silverado. It's the devil. And he is not, I'm not calling Ashton the devil for driving a white Silverado, but I'm saying there's a real enemy that's after you, and he wants your joy. I mean, this series on Christmas presents has been awesome. The first week, the wait that happened in worship after service. Were you here for that? We just started worshiping, and it was like, whoosh. Okay, Pastor Chuck's going to preach on the presence of God, and guess what? The presence of God shows up. This is the answer. Psalm 16:11 says this, "You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." The problem is we try to skip to the joy without the presence of God. We try to find other ways to get to the joy. Going, in your presence is fullness of joy. Went to Walmart a couple weeks ago, and their whole lawn and garden section has been transformed into a different area for toys and all that, and it's called does anybody know? Joy Shop. The Joy Shop. Here's where you get your joy. I don't know about y'all, going to Walmart has the opposite effect on me. It is like all the joy just sucked out of my body right there as soon as you step foot. I mean, I've seen fights in Walmart. Constantly, there's a cop car out there. What is happening in Walmart? There ain't no joy in the Joy Shop at Walmart. But our culture is trying to find solutions. Where do I get joy? And they'll tell you, get all this stuff, get these electronics, get these toys, and therein you will find joy. I'm sorry, you can't get it at Walmart. There's only His presence, the true source of joy. I'm thankful that COVID did this. It exposed churches. Let me say it this way. I think the future of the American church is the presence-driven church. If the world's going to change, it's going to happen through the presence of God. And the one thing I'm thankful that COVID did is it stripped away the hype churches, the churches that are about fluff, the churches that are just gathering a big audience, the churches that are just about numbers in seats. COVID exposed who's really serious about being an army of God and who's just a church attender. And these churches that have been big on the light shows and the productions and all the stuff that doesn't matter have kind of dwindled away and are not as relevant anymore. But the presence-driven church, COVID cannot take away the presence of God. Because it doesn't matter if there's 5 people in the room or if there's 500 people in the room, we can still have the presence of God. It doesn't matter if our screen works or if our LEDs are flickering during worship. And look, there's 3 LEDs not even working right now, but it doesn't matter because our priority is the presence of God. Presence-driven churches are the future of America. I'm not throwing shade at those other churches. Like, well, it sounds like you are actually. No, there's a place for everything in the body of Christ at some level, but I'm just saying we've got to lean into this. It's got to be more than just lighting on a wall. His presence is our highest priority. And if we're trying to seek joy in this season through family, through the Walmart Joy Shop, we're going to end up with the wrong thing. The bullseye is his presence. And in that comes the joy. Back to Nehemiah. I'm gonna just fly through this because this is just kind of a precursor to the message here. But Nehemiah 1:3, Nehemiah was an aide to the king. He was a significant person in the kingdom, and he noticed that the walls of Jerusalem were broken down and it grieved him. And so he asked for permission to go, and he built a team to go and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Many of you are probably familiar with this story. And like I said, for the sake of time, I'm not going to share the whole thing. But there's some interesting things that happen. He builds an army. There's some resistance. They have to learn how to build the wall and fight off the resistance at the same time. This is a great story. I've preached a whole series just on the story of Nehemiah. It's powerful. Our men's group have done studies on it. It's incredible. But there's something significant that happens. They're doing all this stuff. Nehemiah gets up and says, make Jerusalem great again. And they start rebuilding. And they have this mission. And they give out the red hats to everybody. And they start building. And then they finish. And they... I'm sorry. They finish building. And they go through some difficult times. They experience some disobedience, some rebellion. And they're grieved. And Nehemiah gets up after this whole endeavor. And he says this, he says, the joy of the Lord is our strength. Don't be grieved, for the joy of the Lord is our strength. I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is. But I have this formula. I have this formula that if the joy of the Lord is our strength, and his presence is where we get our joy, then his presence gives us strength. Do you follow that formula? You are beaten down. You're worn down. Myself, I'll say we are worn down. We're stressed. We're under attack. I don't know about y'all. I'm fighting with my wife about the stupidest stuff, like out of nowhere. Anybody just getting into stupid fights with your spouse? Like, what is happening? Our strength is being depleted, and the solution is the presence of God. I love that song we sang this morning, and we're going to go back to it at the end, because the joy of the Lord is our strength, and that comes through the presence of God. I'm going to share briefly this morning 4 obstacles that keep us away from the presence of God, and in that, the solution, how to get past those. Practical. I'm big on practicals. If we can't walk out of this church and do something practical to get closer to God, then we're missing it. So I'm going to give you some practical things, 4 ways that we limit the presence of God in our life and what you can do about it. Number 1, unrepentant or habitual sin. Ooh, he's going for it. I'm not easing into that at all. Some of us have patterns in our life that we succumb to on a regular basis that we're okay with, and we tolerate a level of compromise that evicts the presence of God from our life. God cannot cohabitate with sin, and yet we're trying to compartmentalize the presence of God. Like it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. God, you're going to live in that room. This addiction's going to live in that room. This unhealthy relationship at work is going to live in that room. and I'm going to make this work. Romans 6:15 says this, what then? Are we to sin because we are not under law but under grace? By no means. Do you not know that if you present yourselves to anyone as obedient slaves, you are the slave of the one you whom obey, either of sin which leads to death or of obedience which leads to righteousness? But thanks be to God that you were once slaves of sin, have become obedient from the heart to the standard of teaching to which you were committed. And having been set free, everybody say set free. Having been set free from sin, have become slaves of righteousness. You, as a follower of God, are a slave to righteousness, that you become tied, you become committed. Righteousness, the presence of Jesus is our master. And until we can cut out habitual, unrepentant sin out of our lives, we will become slaves to the flesh, slaves to sin. That's got to go. If we want to live in the presence of God, consistent sin has to go. Number 2, obstacle to the presence of God in our life is an atmosphere of division, strife, and gossip. An atmosphere of division, strife, and gossip. And I had this thought as I was preparing this. One of my favorite verses of all time is Psalm 23:3. It says this about God, yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. That basically when we praise God, we create a throne for him to sit in. Another version says that you inhabit the praises of your people. That literally when we praise God, our praises are making a seat for him in the atmosphere. And he comes down and he hangs out. Okay, if our praises can do that, can bring his presence, can literally enthrone. A throne is somewhere you hang out for a while. You don't come and just sit down on like a stair, like you're just going to pop in. On a throne, you make yourself comfortable and you hang out. If our praises do that for the presence of God, is it possible that we can do the opposite with other things? Is it possible? What's the opposite of praise? Criticism, cynicism, complaining, negative talk. Could we, I don't have a verse for this, I'm just inferring that the opposite could be true. Could we make God get up off his throne and go when we criticize, when we have strife, when we gossip? In the same way we invite his presence when we praise him. It's real quiet. Am I messing with your theology a little bit? Am I making you think? Is it possible that the words that come out of our mouth can create an atmosphere where God doesn't want to be? There's an obstacle to the presence of God. It's division, strife, and gossip. Pastor Luke, you're being so mean today. It's Christmas. I didn't come to church to get yelled at today. I don't know what that voice is. Third obstacle to experiencing the presence of God in our life on a daily basis. The voices you listen to. Who and what you listen to. Now, I've been the youth pastor here for 4 years, and I've dealt with a lot of teenagers, and all the time, kids come up to me and say, I'm really battling anxiety and depression or suicidal thoughts. And I always do 2 things. If it's it's a right now suicidal issue, I'm going to call a parent or an authority figure, and we're going to deal with it. The second thing I do is say, show me your Spotify playlist. Show me the last 10 songs you've been listening to in Spotify. There's 2 things that we listen to with these voices, the friends around us and literally the music we're listening to. And I want to challenge you on these 2 specific items because I talk to teenagers about this all the time. And I'm telling you, the American Pediatric Association is going, we're having a mental health crisis, and no one is looking at the music we're listening to. No one's going, what are you feeding your soul? Let's deal with that. And I can tell you 9 times out of 10, if a student comes to me and said, I'm dealing with depression, and I say, show me your Spotify most listened to, it is garbage. It is trash. This is why I don't get too excited about big numbers in youth group. Wow, we had 50 kids last Wednesday. That's awesome. You know what? You know who has the biggest youth group in town? Travis Scott, Olivia Rodrigo. Yeah. They have teenagers following them in droves. And until we can snatch away the students that are following these secular musicians, listen, there's a spirit of music. And I'm not satisfied just to have good church services while Travis Scott is entrancing our children. The thing that happened in Houston a couple months ago, it's horrible. Absolutely awful. Surprising? No. Absolutely demonic music that we are inviting into our homes every single day. And until we cut that out, until we deal with that, there's going to be an obstacle to the presence of God, to the joy of the Lord. How can I sing about the joy of the Lord and then go home and listen to trash? Whew, spicy today. I don't know. My wife and I were going to the trampoline park with our kids a couple weeks ago. And I don't know if you've ever gone to the trampoline park with your kids. They have fun. But by the end of it, you're like, they leave, they want a Slurpee when they leave. It's just like getting them out of there is like a game. It's ridiculous. It's a game. It's horrible. We were in the car after loading the kids, and the Rick Pino album had just come out. The new, it's like an hour-long just spontaneous worship. They didn't record it in a studio. They just recorded a spontaneous worship thing. And I put the album on, and it was like we had just buckled the last kid, and we're starting the car, and it was like, whoosh. I'm crying, my wife's crying. We're like, what is this? Why? The spirit of the music that Rick Pino produced, this atmosphere of worship that he just captured, it created an atmosphere in our van. And I wasn't in the mood to worship, okay? I'm just going to be honest. We've been jumping around a trampoline park, juggling 3 kids. It's not man-on-man coverage. It's zone coverage now. So it's like a lot. And I'm not like primed and ready to worship. I'm frustrated and stressed. But we put that music on. Go look it up when you get home. Rick Pino, The Altar Sessions. And just listen, because he is enthroned on the praises of his people. You create a seat for him and he shows up. The 2 things you listen to, your friends and your music. And I tell young people this all the time. Show me your 5 closest friends and I'll show you your future. Who you hang around is who you become. Yet somehow in our 20s and 30s, we feel like we graduate from that. And we're okay to tell our kids that, but then we'll go to lunch with somebody at work who talks smack about his wife all the time. Or we'll take our kids to a play date where other moms are bagging on their husbands all the time. Or we work with somebody, or we go to school, our colleges, your friends are constantly talking about their body count. Your friends define you. And the voices you listen to, whether it be the music or whether it be the friends, will create an obstacle to the presence of God in your life. There's a woman by the name of Alexandra of Denmark. She was Queen of the United Kingdom and the Empress of India from 1901 to 1910. She showed up on British soil and was a superstar. People, like we do with celebrities and figureheads today, we look up to them. We want to do what they're doing. We look up to leadership and we want to mimic them. There was this crazy obsession with her in the early 1900s in England. There was a couple interesting things. She had a scar on her neck from a childhood accident. And so she wore like a choker-style necklace to cover up her scar. And everybody thought she was being really fashionable, so they all went out and bought choker necklaces. Alexandra was just trying to cover up a scar. Later on, she had a disease. I think it was, let me see if I have it here. She had a crazy bout of rheumatic fever. And when she recovered, the fever had so debilitated her that it left her with a limp. That she went around limping for a significant amount of time after this fever. And people so looked up to her that they actually started walking around limping too, just to be like Alexandra of Denmark. In fact, it gets so crazy that shoemakers in England, this is a real story, shoemakers in England started making shoes where one heel was an inch shorter than the other so that you could put these shoes on and automatically have a limp built in. Why? To look like Alexandra of Denmark. The limp didn't exist, but because of who they were looking up to, they created a limp and they walked around with a limp. They walked around worse off simply because of who they were looking at. Some of us are looking at people that are causing us to limp. Is it possible the limp, the stress is not even real. You've just been hanging around the wrong people. You got to take those shoes off. You got to stop looking at people that are living a life you don't want. You got to stop looking at people that are crippled and following their example. It's like Dave Ramsey said, why would you take advice from a broke person? Why would you take financial advice from somebody who's absolutely broke? Some of us have been listening to theology from people who have no presence of God in their lives. They're limping along. And we just go, they look good, I'm going to limp too. It's time to break the cycle. The voices you're listening to, the people you're listening to matter. The final obstacle that I'm going to talk about today, and this is where we're going to land, is convenience. An obstacle to the presence of God is we want it to be easy. We want a lifestyle of the presence of God to come easy. We almost treat God like Santa. Just give me what I want. I can't tell you how many people I talk to that are struggling with life stuff. I haven't seen them in church in 6 months, but the moment they're struggling with something, they show up. I understand if you're watching online, you've got real stuff going on. There's real conditions and problems. I'm not throwing shade at anybody. It's the second time I've said that, and I don't feel like I really mean it. Because I kind of am throwing shade. Pastor Chuck's like, you're just supposed to talk about the presence of God, man. What are you doing? We want it to be easy. I don't remember where I was. I lost myself. Oh, we want God to be like Santa. Here's my list. Even with this message. Pastor Luke said there's joy in the presence of God. Here's my list. I want joy. Can I just get the joy? Can I skip the presence of God part? Can I just skip that and get the joy? How would you feel if your kids only wanted your presence? Like your gifts? They do, right? How does that make you feel? Corporate therapy session right now. And how did that make you feel? If your kids never want to spend time with you and all they want is the money, that does something to you. Wait a second. I'm your dad. I want relationship. I'm your mom. I raise you. And all you want is AirPods and for me to leave you alone for Christmas? Not happening. We spending time together whether you like it or not. And yet we do that to God. He goes, I'd like to spend some time with you. Many of us have a threshold. We think if we're not spending an hour with God a day, we're missing it, so we just give up. What if you gave God 15 minutes tomorrow morning or tonight before bed? What if you gave God 15 minutes or both? What if you gave God 15 minutes and start there? God, I don't need anything from you. There's a song on that Rick Pino album. I need to get royalties from Rick Pino this morning. A song on the Rick Pino album says nothing else. He didn't write it, but the way he sings it, whoosh, I don't want anything else. I'm not even going to talk about joy or any of my issues. I just need your presence. When's the last time we did that? Everything in our culture is transactional, right? I'm going to give you something and I'm going to get something in return. The essence of the kingdom is sacrificial. That we bring a sacrifice of praise. That, is it possible that coming into the presence of God may not be easy all the time? Tell you what, this morning, we had some flickering lights. We had some tech issues. I had to kind of get past some stuff today to get into worship. And then they started singing, the joy of the Lord is our strength, and I'm there. Like, hello, like so good. But I'm telling you, it's not always easy to get into the presence of God. And I think about the wise men. Oh, honey, look, he's making it Christmassy now. I think about the wise men that came to Jesus. And I'm going to read Matthew chapter 2. Just part of it. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him, and assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where Christ was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, and by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So let's break it down. These wise men travel very far from the east and find Herod and say, hey, we've seen a star. We've heard there's a king that's been born. What do you know about it? And Herod goes, what, a king? And he's threatened by it. And they go, yeah, it's actually even written about in these scriptures. In these old texts, there's prophecy about a king coming. And it's supposed to be like around here somewhere. And then Herod summoned, oh yeah, let's talk about that. Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. So Herod then sends the wise men and says, tell me where he's at so I can go worship him. Really, he wanted to take him out because he didn't want his kingdom threatened. After listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. There's a lot to this story we could camp out on. I want to talk about the fact that they brought significant gifts. And there's a couple of things that we have been taught that I think is incorrect about the wise men. Number one, nowhere does it say there was 3 wise men. And this has been theologically debated. There's a disclaimer I'm going to give you here that I don't have all the answers on this. I'm just going to tell you culturally what we've been taught is probably wrong. Okay, you see the 3 wise men there at a nativity. Is that the most common representation we see? It's likely that there was several hundred wise men. And these treasures they brought were not little boxes. Let me back up something else. It's believed they came from either Turkey or Persia, somewhere in that region, and that journey to Jerusalem is about 1,080 miles. 1,080 miles. Okay, the likelihood that they were present at the birth of Jesus, not happening, because they started traveling after he was born. Okay, so there's been a lot of research here. Number one, it could have been months, could have been years, could have been weeks. Let's just say you walk at a pace of about 3 miles a day, and you walk for about 8 hours a day. That's on a best case scenario, that's 45 days. You want to live with an infant in a stable for 45 days? No, they're back home. In fact, it says they met them at their house, in their house. Going into the house, they saw the child with Mary. Also, if I'm walking 1,081 miles, I am not bringing a little box. We're going to get wagons. We're going to get chariots. We are going to bring gifts. In fact, some researchers have said that they believed in today's currency, the cost of those gifts would have been around $4 million. Up for debate. I'm not giving you Bible truth. I'm just trying to break the cultural norm that we've been taught, that it was not 3 wise men and it was not a little box of gold and a bottle of myrrh. These were significant gifts. They went on a journey. They took time. They likely took an army of people with them to help carry the gifts, to protect the gifts. Gifts on gifts on gifts on gifts. The other thing, have you ever brought a baby a gift? It's not a very gratifying experience. You don't get anything from that transaction. There's nothing in it for you. Maybe if you, like my sister had a baby yesterday, her 3rd kid, they're in Fort Worth, and like when I go visit, I'm going to bring the baby like some balloons and maybe an outfit, but the baby's not going to do anything for me. He's not going to give me a hug or give me a thank you card. You bring a baby a gift, you don't get anything out of that. This was a sacrificial gift. These wise men brought something knowing there's nothing in it for me. I'm bringing these gifts, potentially millions of dollars, not to get anything, but to give. That's my question for us this morning as we close. Are we going to bring a gift today? Are we going to bring something? You're like, well, I already gave in the offering. I'm not talking about that. An obstacle to the presence of God in our life is convenience. And we need to learn to bring a sacrifice. Just to recap, the 4 obstacles to the presence of God. Consistent sin that's unrepented. Division and strife. Our relationships and the music we listen to. And convenience. We need to stop trying to bring God a sacrifice that costs us nothing. We need to stop trying to make it so easy to come into the presence of God. Romans 12:1 says this. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. So I know I've kind of baited and switched you because I spent a lot of time talking about how we need the joy of the Lord. And the answer may surprise you. It's like a clickbait headline. The answer may surprise you. The answer is not to go after joy. The bullseye is the presence of God. And the way we get there is we bring a sacrifice of praise. We bring ourselves.